where the Bell Hooks Institute is based. Currently in Washington, it's partly sunny and 57 degrees. In New York, it's sunny and 52. I'm Askia Muhammad. Thank you for listening to WPFW Washington and WBAI New York.
Source for music, mint, and tea. Wednesdays from 2 to 3 on WPFW 89.3 or online at WPFW.org.
غيرنا روض قاصير لا يتحكم بالمصير نحنا من نسيم منطير ومنرتد على التدمير.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Zein El-Amine with the Shay Show, and it gives me great pleasure to have investigative journalist Ian Urbina as my guest today. A few weeks ago, when the article on the secretive prisons that are keeping migrants out of Europe came out in the New Yorker in the December 6th issue, I had talked about this article. And that's why it's great to have Ian actually to talk about it directly. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I had worked as an interpreter and a translator with Ian on this investigation, and it's been an amazing experience for me. For those of you who didn't listen to that show, just some background on Ian. He's an investigative reporter that has been published in Atlantic, New Yorker, and New York Times. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and he also won the George Polk Award, and he had been nominated for an Emmy Award. And he's the author of New York Times bestseller, The Outlaw Ocean. And welcome, Ian.
Thank you for having me, Zein.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I wanted to ask you first, in terms of the story of what's happening with migrants that are traveling. Most of them are traveling from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe that are intercepted in Libya. What pricked up your ears, so to speak? What got you interested in this story?
Well, I mean, as you know, the focus of the nonprofit news organization I run, which is called the Outlaw Ocean Project, is human rights and environmental concerns at sea around the world. And, you know, it was a huge but unavoidable oversight of mine that I didn't, in producing that book, cover the migrant crisis, you know, tens of thousands of migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean, because I couldn't really figure out a new way into the story. You know, I ultimately did a piece I found a new way, which was about 9 months ago, taking a look at these quarantine ships that the Italian government rents. These are cruise vessels off the coast of Italy. There are 7 of them, and about 10,000 migrants are held on them. You know, these are migrants that have reached Italian soil, but they're kept offshore, ostensibly for quarantine reasons. No journalist had been on board. I found a way to get on board, report it out, and in talking with a lot of those migrants, I just heard story after story about the sheer hell of what people were experiencing in Libya, migrants in particular, and I thought, okay, the next investigation needs to be that topic.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of what's happening with these migrants, who are the key players here? For those who haven't basically read the article, who are the key players that are involved in this, stopping the migrants from getting to European shores?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key players in this narrative are the EU and Libya, and the migrants themselves. So if you think of those as 3 key actors, the role of the migrants is, to a large degree, at least in the initial waves, that started around 2010. These were coming from the Middle East and Africa. Poverty, war, climate concerns were major drivers. 2015, there was a peak. You had about 500,000 migrants reaching European shores, and the demographics had shifted, largely sub-Saharan migrants. Now, the present, these are overwhelmingly sub-Saharan migrants and overwhelmingly climate migrants. The other big player is Libya. Libya, as you know, is a sort of a place that is, in essence, a country in name only, in the sense that it's a fractured state, a dysfunctional, failed state. The north is divided between two governments. The south is a full-on war zone. Huge geopolitical players, the Russians, the U.S., the Europeans, the Turks are in there. So it's a mess. And in the north, the coastal north, you have Tripoli, which is the key launching point for a lot of migrants because it's the closest spot to Europe, and the island of Lampedusa is only a little over 150 miles away. So that's the second player, is Libya. And then the third player is the EU. The EU has essentially southernized its border, whereby, and doing something that's not unlike what the U.S. is doing in Mexico, but the EU has pushed its border further into Africa to try to stop migrants before they reach European soil, where journalists like yourself or lawyers or advocates or whomever can sort of apply different standards. So instead, they're dumping a lot of money of trying to block them before they reach Europe. And the place to do that is in Libya. And you have huge EU money going into aerial assets. The Air Force of this war on migration is Frontex, the border agency that puts airplanes and drones over the Mediterranean looking for migrants. And then the boats that are capturing them, that's the Libyan Coast Guard, that's EU created, funded, equipped. They're capturing the migrants and they bring them to shore. And then there's the prison system, elaborate, brutal prison system on land where all the migrants are kept. And that's also, while the EU doesn't fund the guards or the guns or the bricks and mortar, they do fund everything around the prisons. So really, it's the EU as the primal mover of a pretty brutal system.
In the article, you give the history of, for example, European involvement, specifically Italy, how it changed over the years from being open to these migrants to completely closing and funding a sort of an interception operation. In terms of the U.S. involvement and NATO, with this government, in essence, the government in this northern coastal area, which I don't know if this is the correct name for it, but it would be the National Unity Government, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. Isn't that the government in essence that took over for Gaddafi with our help? In essence,
yeah. I mean, I think yes. There's always a U.S. component in any story globally because the U.S. is the superpower. I do think in this case the EU is the larger player, but regardless, the U.S. and the EU have played a huge role in the specific government, as you're citing, the one that is based in Tripoli and is the UN recognized Western-backed government, and they're the government that is equally complicit in the brutality of the migration of the migrant centers, the migrant detention centers, the prisons. That is the government that actually is a coalition, in truth, of a bunch of different militias, and the militias control different neighborhoods and regions, and they control the detention centers themselves. Those militias, as underlings of this recognized government, are the ones that are committing these brutalities.
You've documented at length the awful conditions of these detainees, of these migrants that were detained in El-Amine detention center in Tripoli, the main place where they're warehoused, where they're your aerial sort of like your depictions of the living conditions and as relayed to you by the migrants that were detained look like something out of the Middle Passage of, in a ship, in terms of people sleeping head to toe or taking turns because of cramped conditions and such. And also at the same time, you had taken a lot of risk in getting the story out and had suffered for it. You've been detained and tortured and beaten and so on. In essence, isn't this government, having been helped by the U.S., did they think that they can get away with all of that? I mean, maybe they thought they can get away with mistreating the migrants, but, American and European journalists, I don't understand how they thought they can get away with that.
I can't claim to be able to see into the minds of those that took us captive. I can speculate that I think one of the key factors to understand those events is to recognize that the sort of highly fractured state of affairs in Libya, whereby even the president doesn't fully or functionally have a control over the attorney general, and the attorney general doesn't really fully have control or authority to tell the secret police, the Libyan intelligence service, which is who took us, what to do and when to release us and why. And then the Libyan intelligence service itself, is bifurcated between two competing militias, one based at the airport, Rada, and the other based at the port, Nawasis, who took us, and they're both part of the official government, and they despise each other. So you've got this incredibly complicated landscape where there isn't a rational, accountable authority structure. So the rule of law is non-existent, and that explains a little bit of how these sorts of things happen. And again, I think the point to emphasize is, as bad as is what happened to us, it pales in comparison to what happens routinely to thousands of migrants that are disappeared into these same prisons, horrifically abused, sometimes killed, and they don't have the benefit of a Western passport or a U.S. government, for example, to get them out.
Mm. Something that I've been curious about, Ian, is that we have Gaddafi, who has been killed, but while he ruled, he would identify sometimes as an Arab when he's mad at some African country, and then he would identify as African when he's mad at the Arab countries. And I had seen stories immediately after his death and at the takeover of this government, or the militias or the rebels, whatever they were called, that there was sort of a blowback against Africans in general that were living. I mean, these are people that are, some of them are diplomats that were marched out to a gauntlet of these people yelling racial epitaphs at them. Mm-hmm. Is this part of that blowback?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and the answer comes in layers. Number one, you're quite right that Gaddafi very tactically played both sides, and was, as a strongman, overseeing a brutal migration detention system, but a unified one under him and his authority back in the day, and was hand in glove in cooperation with Europe and quite especially Italy in migration control. But it was an orderly brutality, right? Under him, a dictatorial, orderly brutality, but nonetheless brutal. He also, threatened Europe to increase their aid revenue, and if they didn't, so as for him to control migrants trying to reach Europe, and if they didn't, he threatened to turn Europe black and unleash, the migrants. So he was a Pan-African when it was convenient, but he was a tactician all the time. Then he falls. Then the country becomes even more complicated. You have lots of different factors. One, you have a country where average people, working people, are trying to survive. They're seeing a flood of migrants come into the country, but the country is a mess. The oil fields are a mess, and whatever infrastructure was there to employ either natives or non-natives is in shambles. And so the standard xenophobic posture begins to emerge, among Libyans towards non-Libyans generally. Secondly, you have warfare going on, and you have mercenaries. And some of those mercenaries are coming from Turkey and Syria and different places, but some of them are coming from Sudan. So you have this additional element where some of the racist and vitriolic posture of some Libyans, depending on which side they're on, are aimed at sub-Saharan Africans and sort of broad brushstroking them as all mercenaries, and they're in Tripoli because they just came up. This is the rhetoric. They're in Tripoli because they just came up from the south, where they were fighting as hired guns for the other side, whatever that is, and that's another reason why they despise them. This, you drive around Tripoli and you see just an overwhelming number of young men, for the most part, migrants, sub-Saharan migrants, on the streets, and so I think the quality of life and the sense of worry and chaos is acute. So for all of these reasons, you do see very intense racism and disdain from many Libyans toward sub-Saharan Africans, but it's a complicated mix as to why.
The article has been published in Arabic, at least in Tunisia, as far as I know. Can you talk about how widely it has been published in other languages, and specifically in the Arab world?
Sure. I mean, part of what we do is we self-fund our stories, and then we offer them for free to venues around the world, and that's our hope, is that it gets more of an impact and read by more. The reporting, which is one big article and then about 5 other additional pieces, has been translated into German, Arabic, French, Spanish, Dutch, and some other languages. I'm probably forgetting Spanish. In the Arab world, we had a lot of coverage in collaboration with Al Jazeera. We also had direct sort of localized coverage in Algeria, Turkey, and Tunisia, as you said, and we're working presently on, with your help, in fact, on getting it run in Libya, which should happen soon. We try to stage the content over a period of time so that if people see it and think it's great, such as we haven't found a partner in Egypt as of yet, we'd like that to happen in other countries in the Middle East, but we're eager to get it seen as many places as possible.
Why do you think you're having difficulties in Egypt, Ian?
Maybe I just don't have the right context as of yet. I think also it's for any venue, whether it's the Washington Post or the major daily in Egypt, it's a little bit of a different thing for someone who's not on staff to approach them, and try to convince them to run something that they didn't produce. This is, I think, where journalism is heading, but it is a bit of a growing pain for legacy outlets in whatever country. And furthermore, the sort of, I'm a Western journalist pitching something about their own region to them. It takes some vetting, but I think once the editors see, our fact check and our rigor and everything we've produced, and look into the integrity of the journalism we produce, then they feel reassured. But it's a process.
Mm-hmm. What do you hope will happen as a result of this article, Ian?
A bunch of things. One, I really hope to help the public writ large, be they European taxpayers, average folk, or lawmakers, or lawyers, or advocates, or parliamentarians, what have you. I hope to provide them with a bit of a clear explanatory model for understanding what's happening, and cut through some of the rhetoric and sleight of hand that has been spun by key proponents of this sort of policy in Europe, and really sort of hold them accountable, and really try to prove that some of the things they're saying are intentionally misleading, and also to give a larger, almost metaphoric framework for people to understand what's going on here. This is a climate migration story. This is a story about the Western, wealthy nations that are attempting to outsource a very difficult challenge to countries least equipped to handle them. That's a formula for human rights abuses and awful things. The U.S. is doing it in Mexico. The EU is doing it in Libya. So to really try to explain globally to the public what's happening, why it matters, why it concerns them, and they're complicit, and how it might be changed.
For us in the United States, can you think of any advocates or anything that Americans can do? Or, at the end of the day, is there really any influence that we have at this point on that government?
Well, I mean, plug for my own organization. This journalism is very difficult. It costs an insane amount. It's dangerous, and there needs to be more of it. There's too much journalism out there that's sort of echo chamber entertainment journalism, and not enough, in my view, of this sort of journalism. And so, supporting those that are doing this journalism, whomever they might be, I think is one thing, because I think more highlighting. Responsible highlighting of the problems will help change it. There are a bunch of really impressive organizations that are doing, yeoman's work on harm reduction, out there, whether it's Doctors Without Borders and the rescue and humanitarian work they're doing on the water, trying to rescue the migrants before they're captured and arrested by the Libyan Coast Guard, and other organizations like Doctors Without Borders that are also working within Libya, doing harm reduction and sort of monitoring of the detention facilities and crimes that are occurring there.
Thank you so much, Ian, for taking this time to talk to us. I urge listeners to check out the article in the New Yorker on December 6th issue. I guess they put it out under the title of The Invisible Wall, about the secretive prisons that are stopping migrants from reaching Europe. Check it out. Check out the online copy of it, because you can also check out the multimedia stuff that Ian did with that, including drone footage, including charts of where Ian followed one migrant from the start through his harrowing journey to his brutal end at the hands of Libyan guards in the detention center, and that's basically the spine of that story. So please check it out. Get the latest issue of The New Yorker. And read about it because it's such an important story, and I hope that it's going to make a difference, because as all of us know, climate change, this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of climate change migration. And what Ian documents is something that there's the belief that you can dissuade migrants from leaving their home. And as one Nigerian poet said, that when my home is the mouth of a shark, I can't help but, move away from it. So there's no dissuasion here. This is just only going to increase, which means if this doesn't stop, the brutality is going to continue. Thank you for all your work, Ian. And thank you for taking time.
Thank you, Dan.
Take care.
Bye-bye.